from the moment that you have a brain, which is around like 8 weeks within your mother's womb, your brain starts to form. It's basically like a blank slate, or like think about it like a highway or like a desert with nothing in it, right? Like there's nothing there, it's blank
Mhm.
space. And a highway gets laid down based on your experience. So if your mom gets sick while she's pregnant, a highway gets laid down in your brain based on that experience and what happens to you in the womb. Or if you hear loud noises in the womb when your ears are first formed, that'll lay down a pathway. A highway will form in this big desert. And every experience that you have lays down highways. This happens every second of your life. It's happened
Mhm.
probably 1,000 times since this podcast started.
Mhm.
And so
My brain
when
has exploded several times since this podcast started.
you're
This has been
welcome.
so informative. Yes, keep going.
What happens over the time, like by the time you get to around 20, especially by the time you hit 30 or 35, is your brain is fucking tired of making highways. It's like, I'm over it. I want to use the old highways. Like, let's focus on the ones that are already there. And so what happens is if anything occurs within your life, your brain does everything it can to reroute to a highway that's already there. So
Okay.
it's like, oh, okay, you want to build a new one, but look how good this one is. Let's go
Okay.
this way. And so highways that are already formed expand and they grow and they become like 6-lane mega highways with a bunch of exits and entrances and overpasses and ways to access them to just make it so readily available, which is the reason why every single one of us has such a different view on the world and why grief is experienced in so many different ways. Because if when I was young, let's say my family just ignored grief, like people died, and this is actually a true story, my parents cannot handle grief. The
Mm.
second someone goes into the hospital, they're basically already dead.
Oh my
They,
God.
I'm not even kidding. I wish I was. Like they're done with it. They
They
talk
just
about
put those
it in the
blinders
past
up.
tense. Blinders are up. And it's like it never even happened. Like they don't deal with it, period. So growing up around that, it makes it feel like that's the pathway and that's what you
Mhm.
learn. Whereas my husband's family builds memorials and shrines for the dead that take over entire walls of a house and they don't
Yes.
stop talking about them. Total opposite direction. They memorialize the dead
He
more
sounds
than
Italian. Is he Italian?
oh yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. Yep. Checks out.
Very fully Italian. Yep, we memorialize the dead. It's what we do.
Checks out. Yep.
That yep, so that shapes the way that your brain is formed. What we want to do with unconscious programming is essentially the fact that your brain is laid down the way that it is. Those highways are set in stone when you get to a certain age, and you don't realize why. So if you're someone who's listening to this and you experience grief to a point where it feels like you can't move through it, like you're just living in grief. And when people say there's a bright side and you can learn things like Jetta,
Mm.
what you were talking about earlier, like if what happened with your dad didn't happen, you might not be here. And would you rather
Mhm.
him be here? Of course. But you can't say that that experience didn't shape you.
Yes.
Someone else might not feel that way. And they might listen
Yes.
to this podcast to try and feel that way,
And
but it's
they think
not
I'm
going
crazy. Yes. Totally understood.
to.
Uh-huh.
That's unconscious programming. It just means that there's some early experience that has shaped your brain in such a way that you can't get to the root of it. You don't understand why.
Mm.
And so, what we want to do with shadow work is we want to go back to the moment that laid down that first initial highway for that particular thing. And we want to dig it up so it doesn't exist anymore. That's called synaptic pruning. And we want to lay down a completely new highway and make that the primary access point. That's called synaptogenesis, the creation of a new one. And so when we do that and we like totally get rid of the old one, we create the space for the new one, it shifts everything. It just completely rewires the brain.
Brain is exploding again. This is fascinating.